Two black sisters, a first-class ticket in their hands, and a flight crew who decided those seats weren't theirs. What started as a quiet morning at the airport turned into a moment that would ripple through boardrooms, newsrooms, and the hearts of millions. Serena Caldwell, calm but unyielding. Imani Caldwell, quiet yet unbreakable. Their father, Malcolm Caldwell, a CEO whose name carried the power to ground an entire fleet. When the flight attendant told them to move, they could have stayed silent. They could have avoided the stares, the whispers, the humiliation. But they didn't. And in the next 17 minutes, their story would travel farther than the plane ever could. What exactly happened in those tense minutes between the gate and the air? How can a single phone call rewrite the rules of an entire industry? And why do moments like this still happen in a world that claims to be past discrimination? Stay with us, because this is more than a story about a flight. It's about dignity, courage, and the cost of being seen. If you believe respect is not optional, hit like, share this video, and subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. The air inside JFK International Airport carried that familiar blend of coffee, jet fuel, and anticipation. Travelers rolled suitcases across polished floors, voices overlapping in a low chorus of check-ins, goodbyes, and gate announcements. At gate C-19, the boarding line for Aurora Pacific Flight 227 was already forming. The flight would take them across the country to San Francisco, a journey Serena Caldwell had been looking forward to for weeks. She walked beside her younger sister Imani, their steps matching without thought. Serena carried herself with quiet confidence, a kind of calm that came from years of navigating both courtrooms and life's harsher judgments. At 26, she was already a rising voice in civil rights law, invited to speak at a major equity summit in California. Imani, just 19, radiated a different kind of energy. Her eyes scanned the terminal with curiosity, earbuds dangling from her hoodie, music faintly audible. She was studying at the New York Conservatory of Music and had been thrilled to tag along, especially since her sister's trip meant a rare escape from dorm life and winter exams. Their tickets were for first class. Serena had booked them months ago, wanting her sister's first cross-country flight to be a special memory. But as they stepped into the priority boarding lane, Serena caught the faintest shift in the gate agent's expression. Polite smile, but eyes narrowing for just a fraction of a second. It was subtle, something only years of paying attention would notice. They boarded quickly, stepping into the warm, slightly perfumed air of the first-class cabin. The seats were wide and upholstered in cream leather, angled for privacy, each with a small orchid in the corner. Serena led the way to 2A and 2B, placing her carry-on in the overhead bin. Imani slid into her seat, running her fingers along the armrest controls. Across the aisle, a flight attendant in a crisp navy uniform approached. She was tall, with a precise bun and a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her name tag read Dana Whitford. "Can I help you find your seats?" Dana's tone was pleasant, but the question landed like an unexpected chill. "No, thank you," Serena replied, matching politeness with politeness. "These are ours." Dana's gaze dipped to their boarding passes. Her smile thinned. "First-class tickets." "Yes," Serena answered evenly, holding them out without hesitation. Dana scanned them, lips pressing into a straight line before she handed them back. "All right then," she said, voice just light enough to pass as casual, but Serena could feel the question underneath. Are you sure you belong here? She settled into her seat, refusing to let the moment take root. Imani leaned over, whispering, "What was that about nothing? We need to deal with right now," Serena murmured, though her eyes lingered on Dana as she walked away. Moments later, a second flight attendant appeared. This one, younger, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile. His name was Ethan Miles. He offered drinks to the passengers who had boarded so far, his manner genuinely welcoming. "Would you like champagne, water, or juice?" Ethan asked. "Water for me, please," Serena said. "And for you," he asked Imani. "Orange juice, thanks," she replied. Ethan returned quickly with their drinks. Serena noticed that while he moved smoothly through the cabin, Dana seemed to avoid their row entirely. She offered champagne to a couple in 1C and 1D, chatted briefly with a man in 3A, but never glanced their way again. The hum of boarding continued. Serena opened her tablet, scrolling through her notes for the summit keynote, but a small tension had already begun winding itself in her chest, that low-level awareness that came from knowing something was off, even if it was only visible in hints. Howard Langston, an elderly man with silver hair and a neatly folded newspaper, settled into 3B behind Serena. He nodded a polite greeting, his eyes kind but sharp. Serena returned the nod. Imani, meanwhile, tapped a rhythm on her thigh in time with whatever was playing in her earbuds. She pulled them out for a moment. "This is nice," she said softly. "Feels different from the usual flights." "It's meant to," Serena replied, allowing herself a small smile. "First class is supposed to feel like you can breathe a little easier, if only it stayed that way." A boarding announcement echoed faintly from the front of the plane. Serena glanced toward the galley where Dana stood with the captain, a tall man with a strong build and the steady posture of someone used to command. His nameplate read Captain Adrian Ross. Dana leaned in, speaking quietly, her eyes flicking toward 2A and 2B. The captain's expression remained neutral, but Serena didn't miss the slight furrow between his brows. She felt Imani shift beside her, lowering her voice. "Why is she looking at us like that?" Serena placed her hand gently over her sister's. "Just sit tight. Let's not jump to conclusions." Inside, though, she was already filing away every glance, every omission. Years of advocacy had taught her that the small moments often built into the big ones. She sipped her water, forcing her shoulders to relax, but the thought pressed at the back of her mind. This wasn't random. The last passengers boarded, stowing bags and settling into seats. The doors would be closing soon. Serena returned her focus to the tablet, but the page in front of her blurred as she caught Dana's voice behind her low, almost conspiratorial. "I'll take care of it before we leave." Serena turned slightly, catching only the sight of Dana walking briskly back toward the galley. Whatever it was, Serena had the sinking feeling it involved them, and in that moment, the flight and everything it was meant to represent felt like it was on the edge of something much larger. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the last few passengers shuffled past. The faint chime of the overhead announcement system signaled that the doors would be closing soon. Serena glanced toward the jet bridge, catching a last glimpse of daylight before it was sealed away behind the metal frame. Imani had taken out her phone, tilting the camera for a quick selfie. "First cross-country trip with my big sis," she said with a grin. Serena smiled but kept her voice low. "Don't post it until we land. Let's just enjoy the flight." From the galley, Dana Whitford emerged again, her heels clicking against the carpeted floor. This time, her smile was fixed more tightly than before, like it was holding something back. She stopped beside their row. "Excuse me, ladies," she began, her voice sugar-coated, "but I'll need to see your boarding passes again." Serena set her tablet down. "We already showed them to you when we boarded." "Yes," Dana replied smoothly, "but there's been a seating adjustment." Serena's eyes narrowed, though her voice stayed level. What kind of adjustment? Dana's tone shifted, softer but sharper at the edges. "It appears these seats are needed for another passenger. I'll need to reassign you further back in the cabin." Amani blinked in confusion. "Further back, we're in first class. We paid for these seats." "That may be," Dana said, "but sometimes operational needs require flexibility." Serena held Dana's gaze. Operational needs or personal preference for a moment. Silence hung between them. Dana's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "If you could gather your belongings, we can get you resettled before takeoff." Across the aisle. Howard Langston lowered his newspaper. His brows drew together as he took in the exchange. Serena noticed the flicker of disapproval in his expression. "I'm not moving," Serena said calmly. "We have valid tickets for these seats. Unless there's a safety concern, we'll remain here." Dana's voice lost its syrup entirely. "If you refuse to comply, I'll have to involve the captain." Ethan Miles appeared from the other side of the cabin, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his voice steady but concerned. Dana turned slightly toward him. "These passengers are refusing a seat reassignment." Ethan's eyes shifted to Serena and Amani, then back to Dana. "Their seats look correct to me." "Do we have an actual overbooking issue?" Dana gave him a look that said the conversation wasn't for him. "I'll speak with the captain," she said, pivoting sharply and heading toward the cockpit. Amani leaned closer to her sister, her voice barely a whisper. "Why is she doing this?" Serena's jaw tightened. "Because she thinks she can." The minutes stretched. Conversations around them were muted but present. Serena could feel other passengers watching without watching, eyes sliding away the moment she glanced up. She'd been in rooms like this before: courtrooms, boardrooms where tension wrapped itself around the air and no one wanted to be the one to break it. Dana returned with Captain Adrian Ross in tow. He was measured in his steps, but there was an unmistakable weight in the way he approached. "Ladies," he began, his tone professional, "there's been a request from the cabin crew to relocate you to business class due to seating needs." Serena met his eyes. "We're not refusing to cooperate, Captain. We're refusing to be displaced without a valid reason. If there's a safety issue, tell us. If not, we're staying in our assigned seats." The captain hesitated. "It's a crew decision to ensure passenger comfort." "Passenger comfort," Serena repeated quietly, letting the words settle in the air. "Whose comfort are we talking about?" Amani's eyes darted between them. "Captain, we're not trying to cause trouble. We don't understand why we're the ones being moved." Howard Langston spoke up from behind them, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from age. "Captain, I've flown first class on Aurora Pacific for 20 years. I've seen plenty of reassignments, but never like this. These young women boarded on time, with tickets in hand. If you're moving them, I'd like to hear why as well." The captain's posture shifted slightly, as though the weight of being observed had just doubled. Dana's jaw was tight. "Mr. Langston," Captain Ross said, I appreciate your concern. I'll address the matter." Serena took a slow breath. "Captain, I'll ask once more, is there a legitimate reason tied to safety or regulation for us to move?" The captain didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at Dana. "Let's step aside for a moment." They moved toward the galley again, leaving a pocket of uneasy silence. Ethan Miles remained by their row, his voice low. "I can't speak for her, but I don't see any reason you should be moved. Just stay calm." Serena gave a small nod. "Thank you." When Dana and the captain returned, his voice was clipped. "For now, you may remain in your seats. We'll be monitoring the situation." Dana's lips pressed thin, but she said nothing. Amani exhaled in relief. Serena, though, knew this wasn't over. She'd seen that look before, the kind that promised the fight had only been delayed, not avoided. The doors closed with a heavy thud. The safety demonstration began, voices reciting instructions over the hum of engines. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Serena leaned toward Imani. "Stay alert," she said quietly. "I don't think she's finished with us." Imani's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Serena sat back, feeling the vibration of the engines through the floor, the sensation of being committed to the journey. She couldn't shake the thought that whatever had just happened in these first minutes would ripple through the rest of the flight. And that ripple, if handled wrong, could become a wave. The seatbelt sign had just flicked off when Dana reappeared. Her smile was gone now. The lines around her mouth were sharper, her steps more deliberate. She carried a tray, but there was something about the way she set it down on the service cart that made Serena's instincts flare. "Can I offer you a beverage?" Dana asked, her tone flat. "Water, please," Serena said. "I'll have apple juice," Imani added, her voice tentative. Dana poured the drinks with mechanical precision, but when she handed Serena her glass, the motion was just slightly too abrupt. The water sloshed over the rim, droplets splattering across Serena's arm. "Careful," Dana said, her voice carrying no apology. "It's full." Serena dabbed her sleeve with a napkin, never breaking eye contact. "Thank you," she replied evenly. From across the aisle, Howard Langston's gaze followed the exchange like a silent camera. Ethan Miles appeared again, carrying a tray of snacks. His eyes lingered on the droplets on Serena's sleeve before he moved closer. "Everything all right here?" Ethan asked, his tone mild but loaded with subtext. "Just a little spill," Serena said. "Nothing that needs a report." Dana's lips tightened. "I'll take care of the service. Ethan, you can handle row 5. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. He gave Serena a quick, understanding glance before moving away. The cabin hummed with low conversation and the occasional clink of glass. Serena took a sip of her water, her mind racing beneath the calm surface. She could feel Imani's tension radiating from the next seat. "She's trying to provoke you," Imani whispered. "I know," Serena replied softly. "That's why we don't give her what she wants." An hour into the flight, Dana returned once more, but this time she didn't stop at their row. She went directly to the couple seated behind Serena and Imani, leaning in close. Her voice was low, but fragments drifted forward. Unfortunate disruption, inappropriate behavior. Serena caught Howard Langston's eyes again. The older man's brow furrowed as he listened. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with whatever Dana was saying. Moments later, Dana walked briskly to the front of the cabin. Serena's gaze followed her, and that was when she noticed the subtle gesture, Dana pressing the small intercom button near the galley. It was less than 5 minutes before Captain Ross's voice came over the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, for safety reasons, we will be making a brief stop in Denver before continuing to San Francisco." A murmur spread through the cabin. Serena's pulse quickened. A brief stop mid-flight rarely meant something minor. Ethan appeared at their row again, crouching slightly so his voice wouldn't carry. "She's told the captain there's a passenger disturbance," he said quietly. Amani's mouth fell open. "What? We haven't done anything?" "I know," Ethan replied, his jaw tightening. "But the captain has to take crew reports seriously. We'll be on the ground soon." Serena sat back, her mind turning over options like cards in a deck. She could confront Dana now, force the issue before they landed. But the better move, the strategic move, might be to let the situation unfold. People showed their true intentions when they thought they were winning. The cabin began its descent into Denver. The view outside the window shifted from open sky to sprawling land below. Patches of green and tan quilted together. Howard leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Caldwell, if they try to remove you, I'll speak up. You've done nothing wrong." "Thank you," Serena said, and she meant it. Allies mattered, even ones you'd only just met. The landing was smooth, but the atmosphere inside the plane was anything but. Dana moved with renewed energy, checking seatbelts and compartments with an efficiency that looked practiced but carried a certain edge. When the plane rolled to a stop at the gate, Captain Ross stood in the galley speaking with a uniformed airport officer who had boarded quietly. Dana gestured toward Serena and Amani. The officer began walking down the aisle. Amani's breath quickened. "Serena, stay calm," Serena murmured, "and start recording." Amani slid her phone from her pocket, her hand steady despite the hammering in her chest. The officer stopped at their row. "Ma'am," he said to Serena, "we've received a report of disruptive conduct. We'll need you and your sister to step off the aircraft." Serena looked him in the eye. "Officer, we've been seated since boarding. No raised voices, no violation of safety rules. Who exactly reported this conduct I can't disclose that," he replied. Howard Langston's voice rose from behind them. "I can. It was her." He pointed directly at Dana. "And I'll testify to what I've seen. These women have been nothing but polite." The officer's gaze shifted between Howard and Serena. Serena's phone buzzed in her lap, a text from Amani, sent without looking. "Call Dad." Serena met her sister's eyes and gave the faintest nod. Imani's fingers moved quickly, typing a single line to Malcolm Caldwell. "Need you now. Aurora Pacific. Flight 422. Denver stop." The moment she hit send, Serena felt the shift. She had just placed a call, not to a father, but to the one person who could reach into the control room of this entire operation and turn the levers. The officer stood there, waiting for Serena and Amani to rise. His expression was neutral, but there was a flicker in his eyes, the awareness that he was walking into something that might not be as clear-cut as the report claimed. Serena adjusted the cuff of her blazer, an almost imperceptible motion that steadied her pulse. "Officer," she said evenly, "before I move one step from this seat, I'd like to understand the exact nature of the complaint." The officer shifted slightly, glancing toward Dana. "The report states that you refused crew instructions and were verbally aggressive." Amani's phone was still in her lap. The screen dimmed but unlocked. Malcolm's name now appeared on the top of the message thread, a small dot showing he was typing. Howard leaned forward again, his voice carrying clearly. "That is a complete fabrication. I have been sitting directly behind them. Not a single raised voice, not a single violation of any instruction. What you have here is a lie that can be disproven by half the people in this cabin." The officer's jaw worked as he considered that. But Dana stepped forward, her voice smooth, practiced. "With respect, sir, you were not part of every interaction. As the senior crew member, I am obligated to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers. These two have been careful with your next word," Serena said, her voice dropping just enough to draw focus. "Because whatever you choose, you will have to repeat it in front of an attorney, on record." Dana froze for a heartbeat, her eyes narrowed. Amani's phone buzzed once. She glanced down, and her heart kicked into overdrive. 3 short words from Malcolm Stay seated. "Recording." She slid the phone onto her tray table so Serena could see it. The older sister gave the faintest nod. The officer cleared his throat. "Let's take this discussion into the terminal. We can sort it out without holding up the flight." "No," Serena replied, calm but immovable, "because I suspect the minute we step off, this flight will depart without us. And given that my father is Malcolm Caldwell, CEO of this airline, you may want to consider how that will look in the incident report." It was as if the air in the cabin shifted. Conversations dimmed. The name landed like a weight. Even Captain Ross, who had been lingering near the galley, turned slightly. Dana's face didn't change much, but a small twitch near her temple betrayed her. "Name-dropping will not excuse misconduct," she said. Howard chuckled dryly. "It's not name-dropping if it's relevant to the chain of command. And trust me, this is about to become very relevant." Amani's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. She answered on speaker. "Dad, you are on with me and Serena. We are still on board in Denver." Malcolm's voice came through low, deliberate. "Put the phone where they can hear me." Amani set it on the armrest between them. Dana and the officer both glanced at it, but neither spoke. "I am in the operations center," Malcolm said. "I have the passenger manifest in front of me. Captain Ross, are you there?" The captain stepped closer, a shadow of discomfort on his face. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. Are you aware that my daughters are being accused of misconduct?" Malcolm asked. "I received a crew report." "Yes," the captain replied. "And did you verify it with multiple passenger statements before initiating removal?" A pause. "No, sir. Standard procedure is to act on crew reports. Consider this your notice," Malcolm said, his tone tightening. "Standard procedure changes today. Until I review the cabin footage and speak directly to witnesses, my daughters will remain in their seats, and Captain, this flight is grounded until that happens." There was a stunned silence in the cabin. Dana's mouth opened slightly as if to protest, but she seemed to think better of it. Malcolm continued. "Monica Price is en route to your location. She will board this aircraft within 10 minutes. She will interview the crew and the passengers in the first-class cabin. Captain, ensure all passengers remain seated until she concludes." Captain Ross nodded slowly. "Understood, Mr. Caldwell." The officer looked from the captain to Dana, then back to Serena. "Given the circumstances, I'll step back and await instructions from your corporate liaison." Serena met his eyes, her own expression steady. "That's wise." Dana's color had drained slightly, but she remained by the galley, hands clasped in front of her. Ethan Miles emerged from the curtain dividing first class and business. His eyes flicked to Serena, then to Amani, offering a subtle nod of reassurance. Howard leaned back in his seat, muttering just loud enough for Serena to hear. "Well, this is about to be interesting." Serena exhaled slowly. The adrenaline was still there, humming under her skin, but she kept her posture relaxed. She knew that in moments like this, composure was not just a choice, it was a weapon. The minutes stretched. Outside the window, ground crew moved about with purposeful strides. Inside, the tension had thickened to something you could almost feel against your skin. Then, the forward door opened. A woman in a dark navy suit stepped in, her ID badge catching the light. Monica Price. She scanned the cabin, her gaze cool but direct. "I understand there has been an incident," she said. "Let's begin." And for the first time since the descent into Denver, Serena felt the balance of control shift in their favor. Monica Price walked down the narrow aisle of first class with the precision of someone used to making decisions that could change careers in an instant. Her dark suit was crisp, her polished shoes silent against the carpet. She stopped just in front of Serena and Amani, her eyes taking in their calm but unyielding expressions. "I am Monica Price, corporate liaison for Aurora Pacific Airlines," she said in a clear, even tone. "Mr. Caldwell has instructed me to conduct an immediate investigation into the events that led to this confrontation. We will start with the crew, then speak to passengers who directly observed the incident." Dana Whitford tried to step forward, but Monica's hand lifted slightly, stopping her without a word. "Senior crew first," Monica said, "but I will also be speaking to your junior crew member." Her eyes flicked toward Ethan Miles, who was standing half-hidden behind the curtain, his posture tense. Dana recounted her version of events with a calmness that came from years of practice. These two young women boarded with first-class tickets, but immediately began questioning seat assignments and our boarding process. When I explained that certain seats were reserved for other passengers, they became defensive and raised their voices. I was left with no choice but to contact the captain. Monica's face did not reveal judgment, but her eyes moved with measured precision, noting every detail. "And you believe their conduct warranted removal from the flight?" "Yes," Dana said firmly. "They disrupted boarding and created tension in the cabin." Monica nodded once. "Thank you. Please remain here while I speak to your colleague." Ethan stepped forward reluctantly. Monica lowered her voice so only he and the nearest passengers could hear. "Mr. Miles, tell me exactly what you saw and heard." Ethan's glance toward Serena and Amani was quick, almost protective. They boarded quietly. They found their seats and stored their luggage without issue. The only time voices were raised was when Miss Whitford questioned whether they belonged in first class. I saw no aggression from them. In fact, they remained calm even after being told to leave their seats. Monica's pen scratched lightly across her notepad, and the allegation that they disrupted boarding not accurate. Ethan replied. Boarding was already complete. The cabin was calm until Miss Whitford initiated the confrontation. A muscle near Dana's jaw twitched, but she stayed silent. Monica straightened and turned to the passengers. If anyone directly witnessed the interactions between these two passengers and the crew, I invite you to speak now. Howard Langston was the first to respond. His voice carried a weight that drew every eye. "I was here for the entire thing. These young women did nothing wrong. They were polite, even when they were being treated with disrespect. The only disruption came from Ms. Whitford's attitude. A woman seated across the aisle from the sisters spoke next. I travel first class often. What I saw was bias, plain and simple. The crew member assumed they did not belong here before even checking their tickets. I was shocked. 2 more passengers added similar accounts, their words weaving together a picture that was hard to refute. Dana's earlier confidence began to falter. Monica took each statement with the same calm focus, her pen moving steadily. When she was done, she looked back to Serena and Amani. You have been accused of conduct that, based on multiple witness statements, appears unfounded. Mr. Caldwell has instructed that you remain in your assigned seats for the duration of this flight. The crew member who initiated this will be relieved of duty, effective immediately. The air seemed to shift. Passengers glanced at one another, some nodding in approval, others whispering quietly. Dana's eyes widened. Relieved of duty, "You cannot, I can," Monica interrupted, her tone still polite but unyielding. "You will be escorted off this aircraft and replaced by another crew member before departure." Serena watched as Dana's posture stiffened, then collapsed into resignation. The senior attendant turned sharply, disappearing toward the galley without another word. Ethan looked almost startled by how quickly the tide had turned. Monica addressed him next. "Mr. Miles, you will assume her duties for the remainder of this flight. Additional crew will join from standby." "Yes, ma'am," he said, straightening slightly. Serena exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. She reached for Imani's hand under the armrest. Imani's grip was warm, steady. The captain's voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a short delay due to a crew change. Thank you for your patience." Outside the window, a new uniformed attendant boarded. Dana emerged one last time, now carrying her bag, her expression unreadable. She walked briskly down the aisle without making eye contact with anyone. The moment the door closed behind her, a subtle ripple of relief passed through the cabin. Monica approached the sisters once more. "Your father will be informed that the matter has been resolved on board. If you require anything during the flight, speak directly to Mr. Miles." Serena inclined her head. "Thank you, Ms. Price," Imani added softly. "And thank you for listening." Monica's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. Listening is the easy part. Acting on what you hear, that is what changes things. As Monica stepped away, Imani leaned closer to Serena. "It's over." Right, Serena's eyes held a quiet knowing. For us, maybe, but not for her, and not for this airline. Dad doesn't let things like this fade quietly. She turned her gaze out the window, watching the ground crew step back from the aircraft. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that the real impact of what just happened would unfold far beyond this flight. The engines began to spool up, a low hum filling the cabin, and as the plane finally pushed back from the gate, Serena and Imani sat side by side, still and composed, carrying the quiet weight of both vindication and the knowledge that a larger reckoning was on its way. The aircraft leveled off at 38,000 feet. The seatbelt sign chimed off, but the air inside first class still carried a hum of awareness, the kind that lingers after a public confrontation. Serena rested her hands in her lap, her posture straight, her breathing measured. Outwardly, she was the picture of composure. Inside, her thoughts moved like a slow tide. She kept replaying the moment Dana Whitford had leaned over and told them to move, her tone dripping with ownership of a space she had no right to claim. She thought about the eyes on them, the strangers who had been witnesses, some silent, some outspoken. She remembered the flush of heat in her chest when she saw Amani shrink back at Dana's voice. And she thought of her father's tone on the phone earlier, calm, clipped, lethal. Amani sat beside her, earbuds in but no music playing. Her gaze was fixed on the seatback screen, though it was dark. She was turning the moment over in her own mind. "2. You okay?" Serena asked softly. Amani pulled one earbud out. "Yeah, just thinking about what happens when we land." "What do you mean, I mean?" Amani's voice dipped lower. "You know, Dad, he's not going to just talk to a supervisor and let it go. He's going to do something bigger. I can feel it." Serena gave a small nod. Probably. They both knew Malcolm Caldwell's version of justice was never small. A movement at the front of the cabin caught Serena's eye. Ethan Miles approached, holding 2 glasses of water with slices of lemon. "From Miss Price," he said quietly, setting them down. "She said to make sure you're comfortable." "Thank you," Serena said. Ethan hesitated, then spoke in a voice only they could hear. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I've seen things like this before, but I've never seen anyone stand their ground like you did." Serena met his gaze. Sometimes standing still is the only way to move something forward. He gave a small smile before returning to his duties. Across the aisle, Howard Langston was watching them. Serena turned slightly toward him. "Thank you for speaking up earlier." Howard's eyes softened. "My dear, silence can be an accomplice. I have grandchildren your age. If they were treated that way, I'd hope someone would speak for them." The hum of the engines filled the pause that followed. Serena let the sound settle into her chest, steadying her heartbeat. Far below, on the ground, Malcolm Caldwell was moving. In a glass-walled conference room at Aurora Pacific's West Coast Operations Center. He stood at the head of a long table. Screens glowed along the walls, tracking flights, crew schedules, and weather patterns. Monica Price's live report played in a corner window, her voice steady as she recounted the sequence of events on Flight 482. "Effective immediately," Malcolm said, his voice cutting through the room. "Dana Whitford's credentials are suspended. Initiate an internal review of her prior flights over the past 18 months. I want passenger feedback, complaint logs, and incident reports pulled within the hour." A director of operations scribbled notes furiously. Malcolm turned to another screen showing a roster of senior crew. "Send an advisory to all flight attendants and gate staff discriminatory behavior. Whether explicit or implicit will be grounds for immediate removal from duty pending investigation. This is not a warning. This is policy." He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his authority was a force in the room. Back on the plane. Serena felt the shift before she saw it. Her phone, tucked in the side pocket of her seat, buzzed with a message from her father. "Stay calm. Finish the flight. I'll see you at the terminal." She read it twice before sliding the phone back. She knew that tone. Whatever storm he was stirring on the ground, it was only beginning. Amani leaned closer. "Was that him?" "Yes. He's meeting us when we land." Amani's eyes widened slightly. "That means this is about to get big." Serena didn't answer. She didn't have to. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as a lunch service began. Ethan returned, serving trays with quiet professionalism. When he reached Serena and Amani, he placed their meals down gently. "Anything else I can get you?" he asked. "No," Serena said, "but thank you for being who you are in a place where it's easier to stay quiet." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Just for a moment. Silence might keep you out of trouble," he said, "but it never changes the trouble itself." As he moved down the aisle, Serena thought about his words. She thought about Monica Price's decisive manner, Howard Langston's public defense, and the other passengers who had spoken up. A chain reaction had started, and she could feel it building. An hour into the flight, Captain Adrian Ross's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been informed of a slight routing change due to weather conditions in our original approach. We will be diverting slightly west before returning to our arrival path. Estimated arrival time remains unchanged. Thank you for your understanding." It was a standard announcement, but Serena noticed the faint shift in passengers' expressions. People were still on edge. The earlier confrontation had turned the cabin into a quiet theater where everyone was aware of the drama playing out. Amani finally unwrapped her blanket, leaning back in her seat. "You know, I thought I'd be embarrassed when something like this happened," she murmured. "But I'm not. I'm angry, and I don't want to hide it." Serena reached over and took her hand. "Anger's fine. Just use it for the right thing when the time comes." The clouds outside the window stretched like endless white plains. The sun catching on their edges. It looked peaceful. But Serena knew better. Above the clouds, the sky was calm. Below them, storms could brew without anyone seeing. Malcolm Caldwell was the kind of man who knew exactly when to bring the storm above the clouds. And Serena had the feeling that by the time they landed, everyone on this plane and perhaps beyond was going to feel the first drops. The rain had started in Los Angeles hours before Flight 482 would touch down. Sheets of water slid across the glass walls of Aurora Pacific's operations center, blurring the lights of the city beyond. Inside, Malcolm Caldwell stood at a digital display showing a timeline of crew assignments, passenger feedback logs, and internal performance reviews. A cluster of senior managers gathered around him. The hum of machines and the quiet tap of keyboards filled the space. The atmosphere was not one of routine. It was the kind of tension that comes when everyone knows something seismic is unfolding. "Pull the cross-reference reports," Malcolm instructed. His voice was low but carried the gravity of command. "I want every complaint mentioning Dana Whitford flagged. Highlight anything involving seating disputes or passenger removals. Then overlay her assignments with any flight delays related to customer service incidents." One manager hesitated. "Sir, if we do this, we might find patterns that's the point," Malcolm said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We do not operate on selective accountability here." Rows of data began to populate the screen, each entry a short, clinical description of a passenger's experience. Words like rude, condescending, and targeted repeated in various forms. Some reports included direct mentions of passengers being moved from their assigned seats without clear reason. Malcolm studied the screen. The patterns were undeniable. Meanwhile, 38,000 feet above, Serena and Amani sat quietly. The hum of the aircraft surrounded them, a steady presence that neither comforted nor unsettled. Amani shifted in her seat, her mind turning over the possibilities of what awaited them on the ground. "Do you think this will stay between Dad and the airline?" she asked finally. Serena shook her head. "No, he's too visible. Whatever happens, people will hear about it." Amani exhaled slowly. "I'm not sure if that makes me feel better or worse. better," Serena said after a pause, "because if it's public, it's harder for them to pretend it never happened." A movement caught her eye. Monica Price had entered the cabin again, walking with the easy authority of someone who belonged in every room she stepped into. She stopped beside Serena's seat. "Your father asked me to check in before we begin our descent," she said. "He's waiting at the terminal. There will be some procedural matters when we land. Security will escort you both directly to a private area." Amani frowned. "Procedural matters," Monica's expression softened. "Your father is initiating a formal review of the incident. That means certain staff will be met on arrival for questioning. It may draw attention. I wanted you to be prepared." Serena nodded once. "Thank you." When Monica moved on, Imani turned to her sister. "Procedural matters," she repeated quietly. "That sounds like Dad's about to make a lot of people very nervous." Serena didn't disagree. Back in the operations center, Malcolm stood with his hands clasped behind his back, studying a separate display that now showed video snippets from security feeds, footage from boarding gates, cabin cameras, and even galley areas appeared in quick sequence. The sound was muted, but the images were damning. He watched Dana Whitford lean in toward passengers, her posture rigid, her face tight with disdain. He watched her exchange glances with another crew member, followed by the subtle shake of her head. "This is what corrodes a company from the inside," Malcolm said, almost to himself. "Not the big scandals, the daily, quiet erosion of trust." One of the managers shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, if this goes public, it will bring questions about broader culture and training." Malcolm's gaze didn't waver from the screen. "Then we answer them, and we change whatever needs changing, up in the sky." Captain Adrian Ross's voice came over the intercom again, announcing their initial descent into Los Angeles. The seatbelt sign chimed on. Passengers began to adjust seats, stow items, and prepare for landing. Serena looked at Imani. "Whatever happens when we step off this plane, we walk together. No hanging back." Imani nodded, her jaw set. Together. The aircraft angled downward, the view outside shifting from endless clouds to scattered patches of city lights between breaks in the cloud cover. The hum of the engines deepened. In the front galley, Ethan Miles finished securing service equipment. He glanced toward the first-class cabin, catching Serena's eye for a brief moment. It was a silent exchange. But the message was clear. He was watching, ready to stand as a witness if needed. As the landing gear deployed, Malcolm's team sent him a compiled report. The list of incidents tied to Dana Whitford stretched over multiple pages. A troubling number involved passengers of color, solo travelers, and women traveling alone. The patterns were not only visible, they were undeniable. Malcolm turned from the screen to the managers in the room. "When they land, I want her met at the gate. Escort her to HR, suspend her immediately pending review, and prepare a public statement. We own the truth before anyone else does." The wheels touched down with a smooth thud. The reverse thrusters roared briefly before the aircraft slowed, taxiing toward the terminal. Serena felt the subtle shift in atmosphere, the mix of relief at arrival and the anticipation of what waited beyond the door. Imani leaned close. "Do you think she knows?" Dana Serena's voice was even. "She knows something is coming. She just doesn't know how much." As they rolled toward the gate, Dana moved briskly through the cabin, checking seat belts and overhead bins. She avoided eye contact with the sisters, her gaze fixed on tasks that no longer mattered. The seatbelt sign went off, passengers began to stand, retrieve bags, and line the aisle. Serena and Imani stayed seated. Monica Price appeared again, standing just ahead of their row. "Wait until I signal," she instructed. From her vantage point, Serena could see several uniformed security officers waiting beyond the open jet bridge door. Dana stepped into the galley, then froze as she noticed them. Her expression faltered. The line of passengers began to move. Monica signaled, and Serena rose with Imani, their movements measured. As they stepped into the aisle, Serena felt the weight of every watching eye in the cabin. They walked forward, not slowing as Dana shifted awkwardly to the side. Serena caught the faint scent of her perfume as they passed, a detail she knew she would remember. At the threshold, Malcolm Caldwell stood waiting. His presence filled the narrow space. He didn't speak, only nodded once at his daughters before stepping aside to let them through. The storm had arrived at the gate, and it was only going to get bigger. The air at the jet bridge was thick with the mix of recycled cabin oxygen and the faint, metallic scent of airport ventilation. Serena and Imani stepped onto the gray carpet, the soles of their shoes making a dull, rhythmic sound that seemed too loud in the sudden quiet. Uniformed officers stood in a semicircle just beyond the door, their posture neutral but alert. Malcolm Caldwell remained at the center, his shoulders squared, eyes fixed not on his daughters but on the figure emerging behind them. Dana Whitford appeared, rolling her service tote with one hand. The moment her eyes landed on the assembled group, her pace slowed. She seemed to shrink slightly, though her chin remained lifted in a fragile imitation of composure. "Ms. Whitford," one of the officers said, stepping forward, "you'll need to come with us." Dana's lips parted, her voice coming out sharper than intended. "On what grounds I've done nothing wrong. I was performing my duties." Malcolm's voice cut in, low but commanding. "Your duties did not include humiliating my daughters in front of an entire cabin, nor did they include removing paying passengers from their rightful seats without cause." Dana's cheeks flushed. "I followed procedure." Malcolm's eyes were steady. "Then you'll have no problem explaining that on record to our internal review board." Passengers streamed past, some glancing at the scene with open curiosity. A man in a business suit slowed as if to listen, then thought better of it and moved on. A woman carrying a sleeping toddler gave Malcolm a nod, her expression one of quiet approval. Monica Price approached from the side, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Whitford, you're being placed on immediate suspension pending a formal investigation. You will be escorted to Human Resources now. Your personal items will be secured and returned to you after your statement." Dana's gaze flickered between Monica and Malcolm, then to the officers. Her fingers tightened on the handle of her tote. "This is unnecessary. It's overdue," Malcolm said simply. The officers stepped closer. Dana hesitated, then allowed them to guide her toward a side corridor. Her departure was met with a subtle shift in the air, a collective exhale from those who had been silently watching. Malcolm turned to his daughters. "We'll talk in the lounge." They moved together through the terminal, a small convoy led by Monica. The bustle of LAX on a rainy night surrounded them, the echo of rolling suitcases, the murmur of announcements, the low roar of departing jets. Yet, inside their group, there was a bubble of focus, insulated from the chaos. The private lounge was tucked behind frosted glass doors, guarded by a discreet security checkpoint. Inside, the lighting was warm, the seating arranged in clusters for quiet conversations. A tray of untouched coffee and tea sat on a low table, its steam curling lazily into the air. Malcolm waited until the doors had closed behind them before speaking. "I need to know exactly what happened from the moment you boarded," he said, his tone calm but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. Imani started to speak, but Serena placed a hand lightly on her sister's arm. "I'll go first." She recounted the sequence in measured detail: the initial boarding, the curt greeting from Dana, the pointed glances, the sudden insistence they moved to economy. She described the disbelief, the quiet humiliation, and the calculated way Dana had stood in the aisle, waiting for compliance. When she finished, Imani added her perspective sharper, more openly emotional. "She didn't just move us. She made sure everyone was looking while she did it, like we were some kind of warning to anyone else who might think they belong there." Malcolm listened without interruption. His hands rested on the armrests of his chair, his posture perfectly still. When they were done, he leaned forward slightly. "This is not just about you," he said. "This is about a culture that allows people like Dana Whitford to believe they can act without consequence, and that ends tonight." Monica placed a folder on the table. Inside were printouts from the operations center, the cross-referenced reports, the security footage stills, the compiled passenger complaints. Serena's eyes scanned the pages, recognizing the same pattern Malcolm had spoken of incident after incident, each echoing the same tone of exclusion. "This will go to the board?" Serena asked. Malcolm nodded, and beyond. "There will be a public statement. There will be changes to our crew training, our oversight systems, and our passenger rights protocols. We are not burying this." Imani leaned back, a slow, almost disbelieving smile forming. "So, this isn't just about suspending her." "No," Malcolm said. "It's about sending a message that reverberates through every cabin, every crew room, every gate in this company." The lounge door opened quietly, and Ethan Miles stepped inside, holding a small envelope. He hesitated at the threshold. "Sir," he said to Malcolm, "I thought you should have this. It's my written account of what happened, and I'd like to speak on record." Malcolm studied him for a moment before nodding. "That's a brave choice. It will make a difference." Ethan handed over the envelope, then turned to Serena and Imani. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for what happened, for not stepping in sooner." Serena met his gaze. "You stepped in when it mattered. That counts." The rain outside intensified, drumming against the lounge windows. The sound filled the pause that followed, a steady, grounding rhythm. Malcolm stood, signaling the conversation was shifting. "We're not done here tonight, but I want you both to go home. Rest. Tomorrow will be long." Serena and Imani rose, their movements in sync. They walked toward the exit, the weight of the night still heavy but no longer suffocating. As they stepped back into the terminal, Serena felt the subtle shift inside herself, the realization that their quiet refusal on that plane had set in motion something larger than the humiliation they endured. The storm wasn't over, but it was no longer chasing them. By morning, the story had broken. Serena sat at the kitchen island, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, watching the footage loop on the living room television. The news anchor's voice was smooth but charged with urgency. Viral video from a late-night LAX departure shows two young women being escorted from first class to economy. Despite holding confirmed tickets, the women, identified as Serena and Imani Caldwell, are the daughters of Malcolm Caldwell, CEO of Aerodyne Airlines. Clips from passengers' phones played in sequence. Dana Whitford's voice was sharp and audible. "You'll need to move to your assigned seats." The camera angle shifted, catching Serena's calm expression and Imani's clenched jaw. The captions were relentless. "Racial bias on Flight 482, CEO's daughters removed without cause." Imani entered the kitchen, her hair still damp from the shower. "It's everywhere," she said, glancing at the screen. "My phone hasn't stopped buzzing." Serena slid her phone across the counter. "Mine either." Messages flooded their inboxes, friends, colleagues, strangers offering support, others asking for comment. Malcolm arrived moments later, his phone pressed to his ear. "No, we won't issue a statement until after the board meeting," he said, then paused to listen, and yes, legal is already reviewing the footage. He ended the call and looked at them. "This will move faster than you think. The public reaction is already forcing hands." Imani leaned against the counter. "So, what happens now?" Malcolm set his phone down. "Now we make sure the conversation doesn't get buried in corporate spin. The truth comes out, and we use it to force real change." The doorbell rang. Serena glanced toward the entryway, her stomach tightening. Malcolm opened the door to find Monica Price, flanked by 2 members of the communications team. "Press is camped outside the office," Monica said as she stepped in. "They'll be outside here soon. We need to control the narrative." Malcolm gestured for them to sit. "Then let's get to work." The meeting that followed was brisk but intense. Monica laid out the immediate steps of preliminary internal investigation: suspension of Dana Whitford without pay, public acknowledgement of the incident, and a commitment to policy review. "The key," Monica said, "is that you speak not just as a CEO protecting his family, but as a leader addressing a systemic problem." Serena watched her father listen, his expression unreadable. She could tell he was already shaping the speech in his mind. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Dana Whitford was giving her own interview. The camera lights made her skin look paler, her lips tight. This wasn't about race. She told the reporter it was about following procedure. They were seated in the wrong section. I was enforcing company policy. The reporter tilted her head. Even though their boarding passes clearly showed first-class seats, Dana hesitated. "There must have been a ticket in error. My priority is safety and order on the aircraft." Her words circulated quickly, but so did the contradictions in her story. Social media lit up with side-by-side clips, Dana insisting she was following policy against the footage of her taking the sisters' boarding passes and shaking her head before telling them to move. By midday, hashtags trended worldwide: Caldwell, sisters, on first class, bias, not your seat. The airline's customer service lines were overwhelmed. Calls ranged from demands for refunds to pledges of boycotts until reforms were made. That afternoon, Malcolm walked into the boardroom. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, its surface already covered with laptops, notepads, and cups of untouched coffee. Board members shifted in their seats as he entered. Some looked uneasy, others guarded. "Let's not waste time," Malcolm began. "You've all seen the footage. You've read the reports. This isn't just a PR crisis. It's an ethical one. And if we don't handle it decisively, it will define us for years." One board member, a silver-haired man in a tailored suit, spoke up. "Are you suggesting we concede wrongdoing before the investigation is complete?" "I'm suggesting," Malcolm said evenly, that we acknowledge the obvious and take action before the public decides we're incapable of it. Another board member, a woman with sharp glasses, tapped her pen. What kind of action? Effective immediately, Malcolm said. We'll implement mandatory bias and cultural sensitivity training for all crew and gate staff. We'll revise our passenger rights charter, and we'll establish an independent oversight panel to review discrimination complaints. Murmurs rippled around the table. And Dana Whitford, someone asked. She's already suspended, Malcolm replied, pending termination. The silver-haired man leaned back. That will make waves. Good, Malcolm said. Waves get attention. Attention brings change. Across the city. Serena and Amani watched the press conference live from the safety of their living room. Cameras flashed as their father stepped to the podium. This incident is not about my daughters alone, Malcolm said, his voice calm but carrying. It is about the unacceptable reality that in 2025 passengers can still be treated differently because of the color of their skin. Aerodyne Airlines will not tolerate this. Not now, not ever. The reporter's questions came fast. Was this an isolated event? How would they ensure accountability? What did this mean for crew members accused of bias? Malcolm answered each one with the same measured resolve. He didn't flinch when asked if his position as CEO influenced the speed of action. If it did, he said, then the problem is bigger than any of us wants to admit. By the time the conference ended, the media storm had intensified. News channels replayed his remarks. Commentators debated the broader implications, and advocacy groups praised his candor while demanding follow-through. That night, Serena lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the past 48 hours swirled in her mind the humiliation in the cabin, the sudden shift when Malcolm appeared, the growing roar of public opinion. She wondered if the reforms would truly change things, or if they'd fade once the headlines moved on. She wanted to believe her father's influence could break the cycle, but she knew the fight would be long. In the room next to hers, Amani tapped away at her laptop, writing a post she planned to share publicly. It wasn't about calling out Dana by name. It was about the quiet ways bias shows itself in glances, in tone, in the unspoken assumption that you don't belong. When she was done, she read it aloud to Serena through the thin wall. "Do you think it's too much?" Amani asked. "No," Serena replied. "I think it's exactly enough." The rain had stopped outside, but the air still smelled faintly of it. The storm was changing shape, but it wasn't over. Not yet. The boardroom victory was only the beginning. By the next morning, whispers of resistance began to surface inside Aerodyne Airlines. Senior executives who had nodded politely during Malcolm's reform announcement were now exchanging guarded emails and private calls. Some saw the changes as a necessary moral stand. Others saw them as a costly distraction from profit margins. Malcolm sat at his office desk, sunlight cutting across the polished surface, reading a forwarded thread from an anonymous source. One line stood out: "This is overreaction. If we start firing crew for minor complaints, morale will collapse." He closed the email slowly, his jaw tightening. The language was careful, but the meaning was clear. They weren't ready to change, at least. Not all of them. Meanwhile, Serena and Amani had slipped back into a fragile rhythm at home. The press still hovered, but the initial shock had begun to fade. Serena spent the morning answering messages from friends who had experienced similar situations. Some were small slights, Others were far worse. Imani, restless, opened her social media feed. "They're calling it the Sisters' Stand," she said, scrolling through posts. "People are sharing their own flight stories. It's blowing up." Serena looked over her shoulder. Good. The more voices, the harder it is to ignore. At corporate headquarters, Malcolm walked into a strategy meeting that felt colder than the day before. The faces around the table were familiar division heads, HR leads, finance directors, but the energy was different. "Before we start," Malcolm said, "I want to address the concerns some of you have raised about the reforms." A man from operations leaned forward. "With respect, Malcolm, we're talking about training costs, extra oversight panels, potential payouts if every complaint gets escalated. We run on tight margins. This could spiral. And what's the alternative?" Malcolm asked. "Pretend this didn't happen. Wait for the next incident to go viral." The man didn't answer. Another voice, this one from HR, chimed in. "Some crew are already calling these policies an attack on them personally. Morale is dropping." Malcolm let the silence stretch before speaking again. "Morale should drop if our people believe treating passengers unequally is acceptable. That's the point we change the culture, or the culture will destroy us." The conversation grew tense. Malcolm could see who was with him and who was waiting for the outrage to fade. Later that afternoon, he met Monica Price in his office. "They're digging in," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "Internal pushback is stronger than we expected. If you force this too quickly, you could face a confidence vote from the board." Malcolm rubbed his temple. "Then we move faster, not slower. We make the reforms irreversible before they have a chance to stall them." At home, Serena was feeling the pull to do more. She sat on the couch, laptop balanced on her knees, drafting a long-form post about what had happened, not just the humiliation, but the quiet moments that most people never saw. She wrote about the look in Dana Whitford's eyes when she told them to move, the way the other passengers shifted in their seats, some sympathetic, others relieved it wasn't them. The fact that neither she nor Imani had raised their voices, yet they were treated like intruders in a space they had paid to enter. When she finished, she showed it to Imani. "What do you think?" Imani read it slowly, her brow furrowed. "It's powerful, but if you post this, it'll drag us back into the spotlight." "You ready for that?" "I'm not ready," Serena admitted. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to do it anyway." That evening, Malcolm returned home later than usual. He found the sisters in the kitchen, their laptops open. "I'm thinking of making a statement of my own," Serena said, looking up at him. Malcolm considered her for a moment. "If you do, it should be on your terms, not because you think it'll help me or the company. This fight isn't just mine, it's yours too." The next morning, Serena's post went live within hours. It had tens of thousands of shares. People tagged the airline, demanding to know what steps were being taken. Media outlets picked it up, reading excerpts on morning shows. In the Aerodyne offices, executives watched the coverage in uneasy silence. Malcolm's reforms were no longer a CEO's pet project. They were a public demand. But the pushback hardened. Anonymous leaks suggested that some executives were exploring ways to sideline Malcolm's authority, citing loss of focus on operational priorities. That night, Malcolm received a message from a trusted board ally. "They're talking about an emergency session. Be ready." He didn't tell the sisters not yet. Instead, he sat in his study, staring at the framed photos on the wall, one of Serena as a child, her eyes wide and curious, another of Imani at her high school debate competition, her fist raised in quiet triumph. He thought about what it would mean to fail them now, to let the system push back hard enough that the changes dissolved into nothing. The internal fight was becoming just as fierce as the public one. 2 days later, the emergency board session was called. Malcolm walked into the room knowing exactly what was at stake. Some members wanted to slow the reforms, reframe them as suggestions, and push final decisions into next year. "If we do that," Malcolm said, standing at the head of the table, "we've already lost. The public will know we backed down. And when the next incident happens, and it will, we won't have the defense that we tried." One board member tried to interrupt, but Malcolm kept going. "This isn't about my daughters anymore. This is about who we are as a company. Do we protect our passengers' dignity, or do we protect our comfort?" There was a long pause. Then one of the newer members, a woman in her 40s, spoke up. "I agree with Malcolm. If we dilute this now, we'll regret it. The cost of change is high. The cost of silence is higher." That broke the tension. A slow shift in the room as others voiced reluctant support. In the end, the reforms held barely. When Malcolm got home that night, Serena and Imani were waiting in the living room. He told them everything: the resistance, the narrow victory, the reality that not everyone inside the company wanted to see this through. Imani crossed her arms. "Then we keep pushing, inside and out." Serena nodded. "If they want this to fade, we'll make sure it doesn't." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Then I guess we're in this together." Outside, the city lights glowed against the night sky. The sisters knew the fight wasn't over. It had only shifted into a different kind of battlefield, one where the weapons were policies, pressure, and persistence. The story had moved beyond them, yet somehow Serena and Imani still found themselves at the center of it. Every time they opened their phones, there were more messages, more tags, more calls for interviews. Some people wanted them to be symbols, others wanted them to disappear. By Friday morning, Serena was pacing the living room. "We can't just let Dad handle this," she said. "It's our experience. We lived it. We should speak for ourselves." Imani, curled up on the couch with a mug of tea, didn't answer right away. She was scrolling through yet another article, one that dissected their appearance, their clothes, their expressions, as if any of that explained why they'd been removed from their seats. "They're already talking about us," Imani finally said. "Might as well make sure they hear the truth from our mouths, not someone else's." The sisters decided to record a video together, no script, no editing, just the two of them sitting side by side at the kitchen table. Serena set up her phone, hit record, and looked straight into the lens. "My name is Serena Caldwell," she began. "This is my sister, Imani. Last week, we were removed from our first-class seats without explanation and told to sit and coach." Imani leaned forward. "We didn't shout. We didn't argue. We just sat there, confused. And yet, a flight attendant decided we didn't belong where we were, and she made sure we knew it." They spoke for 20 minutes about the humiliation, the long walk down the aisle under the gaze of strangers, the way their father's face had changed when he arrived and learned what had happened. They ended the video with a quiet plea. "We're not asking for special treatment," Serena said. "We're asking for the same respect that should be given to every passenger." no matter their skin color, their age, or their gender. When they posted it, they expected a ripple. What they got was a wave. The video spread across social media platforms in hours, hitting 1 million views before nightfall. In the comments, people shared stories of their own, some eerily similar, some far worse. A woman described being told she looked lost while sitting in business class. A man recounted being escorted off a plane because a crew member didn't like his tone. The public pressure on Aerodyne intensified. News anchors played clips from the sisters' video during primetime segments. Activists called for more transparency in airline policies, inside corporate headquarters. Malcolm watched the coverage with a mix of pride and apprehension. He knew the sisters' voices gave the reforms moral weight, but he also knew it would provoke the faction within the company that still resisted change. Sure enough, the backlash came quickly. Crew union representatives accused the sisters of vilifying flight attendants. Anonymous comments flooded online forums, questioning their story, twisting details, inventing new ones. Serena read some of them, her hands trembling. "They're saying we made this up," she whispered. Amani closed the laptop, then let them talk. "We know what happened, and so does Dad." 2 days later, Malcolm called them into his study. "There's going to be a hearing," he said, "an internal review, with the board present. They want to hear from passengers as part of the process." "You mean us?" Serena said. "Yes," Malcolm replied, "but I won't pressure you. You don't have to do this." Amani exchanged a glance with her sister. "We'll be there." The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. The location Aerodyne's executive conference room on the top floor of their glass headquarters tower. When the day arrived, the sisters walked in together, heads high, their father trailing just behind them. The room was long and bright, lined with windows that looked out over the city. At the far end, the board members sat in a row, their expressions a mix of curiosity, caution, and something harder to read. Ms. Caldwell, the chairwoman began. "Thank you for coming. We understand this has been a difficult time for you both." Serena clasped her hands in her lap. "It's been more than difficult. But I'm here because if we don't talk about it, nothing changes." They recounted the flight and detailed the boarding process. The moment Dana Whitford told them to move, the tone of her voice, the reactions of other passengers. Serena described the sting of humiliation. Amani described the confusion and the quiet anger that had burned in her chest. One board member leaned forward. "You're aware, of course, that the crew involved may lose their jobs." Amani didn't flinch. "If they can't treat passengers equally, they shouldn't have those jobs. This isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility." The room fell silent. For a moment, all that could be heard was the hum of the air conditioning. When the sisters left, Malcolm stayed behind for the executive session. Voices rose behind closed doors. Some argued for immediate action. Others pleaded for more time to evaluate. Outside, Serena and Amani stood in the lobby, looking out through the glass at the street below. "Think they'll actually do something?" Amani asked. Serena's answer was quiet but firm. "They have to. Too many people are watching now." That night, the sisters received a call from Monica Price. "You two changed the tone of that meeting," she said. "They can't spin this as an isolated incident anymore. It's too public, too personal." Serena exhaled slowly. Then maybe it was worth it. The next morning, the headline shifted. Aerodyne board weighs sweeping changes after sister's testimony. For the first time, The narrative wasn't about damage control, it was about what came next. At home, Malcolm gathered them in the kitchen. "You've both done more than I could have asked, but the next step, it's going to be harder. They'll try to water this down, make small gestures instead of real change. That's when we have to be the loudest." Serena nodded. "Then we won't stop talking." Amani smiled faintly. "We started this on a plane. Might as well see it through until they fix every one of them." The sisters knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time since that humiliating walk down the aisle, they felt like they were steering the course together. The boardroom decision came faster than anyone expected. By Thursday afternoon, Aradine released a statement that rippled across every news outlet in the country. It began with 3 words rarely heard from a corporate giant: "We were wrong." The statement detailed a sweeping set of changes to airline policy: mandatory anti-bias training for all crew, transparent reporting of passenger complaints, real-time oversight on seat reassignment to prevent discriminatory removals, and, perhaps most significant, a new passenger dignity clause, binding the airline to uphold the rights of travelers regardless of race, gender, or background. The media called it unprecedented. Activists called it a start. For Serena and Amani, it felt like both an ending and a beginning. They learned about the decision not from the news, but from their father. Malcolm walked into the living room holding 3 copies of the statement, printed on heavy cream paper. He handed one to each of them. "This is official," he said, "and it's because of what you did. Your voices, your truth. They couldn't ignore it." Serena ran her fingers over the paper. "So that's it. They changed the rules, and it's over." Malcolm shook his head. "Rules are just words until people choose to follow them. This will take work, and they'll test it. But now there's a standard they can be held to." That night, the sisters joined their father for a private dinner in the corner of a quiet restaurant. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves to relax. The conversation drifted from policy changes to school plans to memories of family vacations. But even in that warm, dimly lit space, they knew the story wasn't done. The next day, they would fly again, and this time to Washington, D.C., where Malcolm was scheduled to speak before a Senate subcommittee on transportation ethics. It was more than symbolic. Malcolm wanted his daughters with him to show that the issue was not abstract, not distant. It was personal, and it had faces. The morning of the flight, the 3 of them arrived at the airport together. There were glances from strangers, some curious, some warm, a few hostile. Serena noticed one man lower his phone after taking a picture, pretending to check his messages. They moved through security with practiced ease, though each beep of the scanner still made Amani tense. Boarding was called for first class, and the gate agent smiled at them. "Welcome aboard, Caldwells. Glad to have you with us today." It was a small thing, but to Amani, it felt like the first note of a different song. Inside the cabin, they settled into their seats. The space was quiet, the leather cool beneath their hands. No one asked them to move. No one questioned their place. As the plane taxied to the runway, Serena leaned toward her sister. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Amani nodded. "Yeah, like maybe we're not carrying this alone anymore." Halfway through the flight, Malcolm pulled a slim notebook from his briefcase. "I want you 2 to see something," he said, sliding it across the table. Inside were handwritten notes, passenger accounts sent to Aradine since the sisters' story went public. Some were short, a single line of thanks. Others were pages long, recounting moments of quiet prejudice that had never been addressed. "This," Malcolm said, tapping the notebook, "is why we don't stop. Every one of these people thought they were invisible until they saw you." Serena felt her throat tighten. "We didn't ask for this. I know," Malcolm said, "but you answered it anyway. That matters." The landing was smooth. They stepped off into the bright, echoing terminal of Reagan National Airport. Waiting cameras caught their arrival, the sisters walking beside their father in matching dark coats, heads high. The Senate hearing the next day was a formal affair, the kind where words are chosen carefully and recorded in permanent transcripts. Malcolm spoke with steady authority, but it was Serena's and Amani's testimonies that drew the room into silence. Serena spoke of the quiet humiliation, of the way her voice felt caught in her chest as they walked to coach. Amani spoke of the long days after, scrolling through strangers' opinions about their worth. When they finished, there was no applause. It wasn't that kind of room, but there was something better. Lawmakers leaning forward, a stenographer's hands pausing for a beat, a moment where it felt like the air itself was holding still. Weeks later, Aerodyne's changes were adopted industry-wide by other major carriers. The passenger dignity clause became a talking point in travel magazines, on morning shows, in classrooms discussing ethics. The sisters didn't become public figures in the celebrity sense. They went back to school, to routines, to late-night talks in the kitchen. But they knew their names had been written into a different kind of record, one where their quiet refusal to accept humiliation had reshaped a corner of the world. One evening in spring, months after that flight, the three of them boarded another plane together. Different city, different airline, same seats, first class. The flight attendant, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, offered them drinks with no trace of suspicion. Serena caught Amani's glance across the aisle. A small smile passed between them. As the engines roared and the plane lifted into the fading light, Malcolm rested his hand on the armrest between them. "Remember," he said softly, "this isn't just about where you sit. It's about knowing you belong anywhere your ticket, your work, and your dignity take you." The sisters looked out the window as the city shrank below, the clouds opening like a path ahead. They knew there would be other fights, other rooms where they would need to speak. But for now, they sat in the quiet hum of the cabin, carried forward by more than the plane. They were carried by the truth they had spoken, the change they had helped make, and the unshakable knowledge that they were not passengers in someone else's story anymore. Some flights change your destination. This one changed an industry. Serena and Amani didn't just reclaim their seats. They reclaimed a truth too often stolen in silence, that dignity is not a privilege you have to earn twice. What began as an insult in the aisle ended with a new passenger dignity clause that would protect countless travelers to come. But this story is not just about victory. It's about the cost of standing up, the stares, the doubt, the pressure to let it go for the sake of peace, and the courage to say no, not just for yourself, but for everyone who might face the same door slammed in their face tomorrow. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you don't belong where you've rightfully earned your place, then you know this fight is far from over. Let Serena and Amani's journey remind us change doesn't happen when we wait for it. It happens when we demand it. If this story moved you, let it move others too. Like, share, and subscribe so these voices aren't drowned out. And join us next time for another true story that refuses to stay quiet.